I paid $2,000 a month for elite childcare until a hidden camera in my son's diaper bag caught staff crushing pills into baby bottles while one teenage girl ignored 60 unconscious toddlers. The police told me to drop it or else. The diaper change was supposed to take 30 seconds. Ethan started screaming before I even laid him down. Not the ordinary fuss of a baby who'd rather be doing something else. This was something older than language. Raw, animal. He twisted his whole body sideways and clawed at the changing mat with both fists, his face going a deep bruised red that I'd never seen on him before. "Hey," I said. "Hey, buddy. It's just me. It's Mama." He didn't hear me, or he heard me, and it didn't matter. He screamed straight through the change, straight through the snap of the onesie, straight through me picking him up and pressing him against my chest and rocking in the small, stupid way that had always worked before. He screamed until he was hoarse. Then he went quiet in the sudden, frightening way that meant he'd exhausted himself, not that he felt better. I stood in the middle of his nursery holding him against me, his breath coming in ragged little hitches, and I thought about what Miss Amber had told me that afternoon at pickup. "He's just hitting his independent phase," she'd said. The smile had been wide and seamless, the kind you practice in a mirror, totally normal for this age. Nothing to worry about. 2 weeks ago, Ethan laughed through diaper changes. He'd grab his feet and try to eat them. He thought the whole process was one long game. I laid him down in his crib. He was already half asleep, worn out from his own terror. I watched his chest rise and fall and tried to find the thing inside myself that still believed the word normal. I couldn't find it. That was a Tuesday in late October. Ethan was 14 months old. I remember the exact date because I wrote it in the small notebook I'd started keeping. October 22nd, screaming at diaper change. 3rd time this week, still refusing bottles at home, still sleeping 5 p.m., 7 a.m. on daycare days. I wrote it down because I was already keeping score. I just didn't know yet what game I was playing. I became a mother at 31, single, by choice and by circumstance. Ethan's father, Marcus, had been kind and well-meaning and fundamentally unprepared for the weight of what we were building. We ended it before Ethan was born. No bitterness between us. We shared custody on a loose cooperative schedule. But the day-to-day of raising a child fell primarily to me. I worked in pharmaceutical compliance, which is exactly as tedious as it sounds and exactly as necessary. And my salary was decent enough that I could afford good childcare without gutting my savings. Good childcare. That was the entire calculation. I spent 6 weeks researching daycares before I went back to work. I read every review on every platform. I made appointments at 4 facilities and walked every one of them. Little Stars Academy on Maplewood Drive was the last one I visited, and it was the one that made me exhale. The building was clean. The staff-to-child ratio posted on the wall showed 1.4, which exceeded the state requirement. The director, a woman named Gwendolyn Hargrove, shook my hand firmly and looked me directly in the eye and said, "We treat every child here as if they were our own." She had the bearing of a woman accustomed to being trusted. Silver hair pinned back, reading glasses on a chain, sensible shoes. She reminded me of the kind of pediatrician who tells you the truth without making you feel stupid for asking. The tuition was $2,000 a month. I flinched at the number. She saw me flinch. "I know it's significant," she said, "but you're not paying for babysitting. You're paying for development, for safety, for peace of mind while you're working. You're paying so you don't have to wonder." I signed the paperwork in early February. Ethan was 7 months old. For 5 months, everything was fine. Or it appeared to be. He came home happy, or at least normal tired, the reasonable exhaustion of a busy day. His developmental milestones tracked. He started pulling himself up on furniture in March. He said his first word, "ba," which we decided counted as ball, in April. I dropped him off every morning at 7:15 and picked him up at 5:30, and the handoffs were smooth and warm, and Miss Amber, his primary caregiver, always had a cheerful update waiting for me. Then July happened. It started subtle. He fussed more at night, took longer to settle. By August, the sleep patterns had shifted. He was sleeping longer after daycare days, which I chalked up to a growth spurt. By September, the bottles became an issue. He'd drink normally on weekends, refused them, flat out, on Sunday evenings and Monday mornings. I switched formulas, tried different nipple flows, assumed a preference had developed. By October, he was screaming at diaper changes, and I had started keeping a notebook. The first moment I knew something was genuinely wrong, not just off but wrong, was the half-day conversation. I'd done the math. On weekends, Ethan was himself, full energy, wrecking ball, pulling books off shelves and laughing at the chaos. On daycare days, he came home destroyed, not tired, destroyed. The difference in him was the difference between a dimmer switch turned all the way down versus all the way off. I started timing his arrivals home. He would eat a few bites of dinner and be unconscious by 5:15, sometimes 5 hours. He'd sleep straight through until 6:30 or 7 hard the next morning. 14 hours, 15 sometimes. Babies sleep a lot. I knew that. But there was a quality to this sleep that made me stand in the doorway of his room and watch his chest. I decided to test them, not with a camera, not yet, just words. "I've been thinking about switching Ethan to half days," I said to Miss Amber at pickup on a Wednesday. I kept my voice loose and casual, the way you do when you're not casual at all. Full days might just be too much stimulation for him right now. She cut me off before I finished the sentence. "We don't offer half days. Your website says you do." The smile didn't waver, but something behind it shifted. A recalibration. "That's outdated information. We actually restructured the program in the spring, and honestly, we're fully booked regardless." She turned away. The conversation ended the way a door closes. With a click, not a slam. slam, but definitively. I sat in my car in the parking lot for 4 minutes before I could drive. That night, I ordered a USB camera the size of my thumb from a third-party electronics site. It arrived 2 days later in a padded envelope with no return address, which felt appropriate. I practiced burying it between the burp cloths in Ethan's diaper bag until I could do it in under 10 seconds without looking. My hands were shaking every time I practiced. They were still shaking on the Friday morning I dropped him off. I picked him up at the usual time, took the diaper bag home, locked myself in the bathroom, and downloaded the footage onto my laptop. I sat on the edge of the bathtub with my laptop balanced on my knees and watched 38 hours of video over the next 2 days. I watched it in pieces, in segments, in the specific sections I could bear, and then the sections I couldn't. I made myself watch all of it. Within 30 minutes of arrival on Friday morning, Ethan was unconscious in his crib, not napping. I know what napping looks like. This was something else. He didn't shift, didn't startle when doors opened, didn't respond when another child cried nearby. His limbs lay exactly where they'd been placed. His face was slack in a way that is not the face of a sleeping baby. He didn't move for 8 hours. No diaper change, no feeding, no one leaned over his crib. One teenage girl, she couldn't have been more than 17. I'd seen her before but never known her name, sat in the corner of the room with her phone and scrolled. Around her, in a room that smelled of carpet cleaner and something I hadn't been able to name at drop-off, at least 20 other toddlers lay in the same condition. Same stillness, same slack faces, the same quality of unconsciousness. I sat on the edge of the bathtub and didn't breathe. Then Gwendolyn Hargrove walked into the room. She smiled, wide and warm and completely composed. She arranged 4 small chairs in a semicircle, sat down facing them, opened a picture book in her lap, and began reading aloud to empty chairs. Her voice was animated, engaging. She did the voices. She paused to show the pictures to the empty space in front of her. Then she took out her phone and snapped a photograph. 20 minutes later, I was watching their Facebook page refresh with a new post. Another wonderful story time at Little Stars Academy. Our littles love their books. The photograph showed Mrs. Hargrove at the center of the shot, the sleeping children visible but soft focus in the background. The whole image warm and institutional and completely false. I put the laptop down on the bathroom floor. I sat there for a while. Then I picked it back up. I repositioned the camera every day for the following week. I placed it near the kitchen entrance on Tuesday. That was when I saw the bottles. There were 2 staff members I hadn't seen before, a heavyset woman in her 50s, and a younger man who wore his hair in a ponytail. They worked at a table near the sink. They used a mortar and pestle, unhurried, the way you'd crush herbs for a recipe. They divided the powder into portions. They poured it into formula containers. They worked through a full row of bottles. I counted 16, methodically, without speaking to each other, without looking up. On Thursday, I angled the camera toward the refrigerator. The milk containers had the Little Stars Academy label on them, but the date printed on the label was 3 weeks past. I watched the same woman pour expired milk into formula containers, reseal them, and place them back in the fridge in a neat row. I photographed every posted inspection sheet on the wall during morning drop-off over the course of 2 weeks. I was careful about it. I'd pretend to be consulting my phone while Ethan was handed off. The sheets showed passing scores, clean facilities, correct staff ratios. 1.4, posted right there in neat black type. By my count, on the Thursday, I'd done a full room survey by arrival time. There were 3 adults present for 60 children, 60 toddlers, 3 adults, a mortar and pestle, and a woman reading cheerfully to empty chairs for the camera. The notebook I'd been keeping filled up. I started a second one. I thought about what to do. I thought carefully and for a long time before I moved. The police station on Renfrew Avenue was 8 minutes from the daycare. I drove there on a Monday morning after dropping Ethan off, which I can barely explain even now except that I told myself I needed to establish a record, needed the system to have a timestamp. The officer who took my report was young, late 20s, with the flat affect of someone who processes paperwork rather than problems. He let me talk. He watched the first few minutes of footage on my phone. Then he set the phone down on the desk between us. "Ma'am," he said, and he couldn't meet my eyes. "The footage you recorded that inside a private facility, without the facility's consent. That's potentially a criminal violation of state surveillance law. I'd strongly advise you to be very careful about what accusations you make against the Hargrove family." The Hargrove family. That was how he said it. Not Mrs. Hargrove. The Hargrove family. Like a weather system. Something you navigate around rather than through. I went home and did research I should have done in February. I found the organizational chart for the state's childcare licensing division within about 45 minutes. The director of licensing was a woman named Diane Hargrove Kessler. I found Mrs. Hargrove's husband listed on the city council website, Councilman Robert Hargrove, representing the 3rd District, member of the Early Childhood Development Subcommittee. I found his brother listed in the DA's office public directory. They weren't just connected, they were embedded. The institution that licensed them was run by a member of their family. The government body that contracted with them was chaired by one of them. The office that would prosecute them employed another. I drove home. I made dinner. I gave Ethan a bath and put him down and sat at my kitchen table and stared at nothing for a while. Then I opened my laptop and started a new evidence folder. I had met Dana Purcell in the parking lot the previous March, when we'd bumped strollers trying to navigate the drop-off bottleneck at the same time, and laughed about it and exchanged numbers in the vague, half-hearted way that parents sometimes do. I'd texted her twice since then, social things that went pleasantly nowhere. I texted her now with something more specific. "I need to talk to you about little stars. In person, not over text. She wrote back in 3 minutes. I've been having concerns too. Priya Mathur I knew less well. She was quiet at pickup, kept to herself, always had the slightly hollowed look of someone running on 4 hours of sleep and professional obligation. But she had a daughter, 18 months, who'd been a little star's child for almost a year. I found her number through Dana. I sent the same message. She called me that same night. My daughter has been sleeping 14 hours on daycare nights, she said. Her voice was very controlled. I asked her pediatrician. He said it was a sleep regression. Mine too, I said. We agreed to meet the following Saturday morning at my apartment, after Priya's husband could take their daughter for a few hours. The three of us sat around my kitchen table. I opened my laptop. I played the footage in silence. I watched their faces. Dana put her hand over her mouth about 4 minutes in and didn't move it for a long time. Priya sat very still. When the clip of the mortar and pestle played, she inhaled once, sharply, and then seemed to decide not to make a sound. When it ended, nobody spoke for a moment. What do we do? Dana asked. We document everything we can, I said, and then we find a way to get it to someone the Hargroves can't reach. We divided the work. Priya kept a camera in her daughter's bag on rotating days. Dana photographed every publicly posted document she could access during drop-off. I maintained the central archive, a cloud folder with encrypted access that I backed up to a physical drive I kept at Marcus's apartment, because I didn't entirely trust my own home at that point. The threat I'd received from the police officer had lodged somewhere specific in me, like a splinter. We said nothing to anyone else. We were polite at drop-off. We smiled back at Miss Amber's rehearsed smile. We made small talk about the weather and the upcoming holidays, and whether the parking situation would improve with the construction finished. We kept going back. I have thought about this decision many times since. People have asked me, and I understand the question, how I could keep bringing Ethan to a place I had reason to believe was harming him. The answer is not simple. Part of it was that we needed more evidence. Part of it was that I was monitoring him more closely than I ever had, checking his temperature every morning, watching his responsiveness, taking him to his pediatrician for a blood panel that showed nothing immediately alarming. Part of it was that I was genuinely afraid that if I disappeared from the facility suddenly, something would be destroyed before I could get it out. And part of it, the part I find hardest to say, was that I was terrified of being wrong, of being the mother who burned down a building full of innocent people on the basis of footage a lawyer would call inadmissible and a police officer had already called criminal. I needed to be certain before I could afford to be certain. I became certain on a Thursday in the first week of November. Ethan came home at 5:30 and ate about 4 bites of sweet potato puree and went quiet in my arms. This was normal now, the new normal I despised. I put him in his crib. At 8 I checked on him. At 10 I checked again. At 11 I put my hand on his chest and felt his breathing, and it was wrong. Not absent, but shallow in a way that made my own chest tighten. I spoke his name, loudly. He didn't respond. I picked him up and he was limp in a way that was not sleep. His eyes opened partway and closed again. I drove to St. Catherine's Hospital with one hand on the wheel and one hand on his chest the entire way. 8 red lights, 3 of which I went through. The ER team moved fast. Blood draw within 10 minutes of arrival. The attending pediatrician, a woman named Dr. Felicia Osi, came back into the room with results faster than I expected, and a face that had rearranged itself into something careful and grave. Ethan's blood work shows a significant level of diphenhydramine, she said. That's the active ingredient in Benadryl. The level we're seeing is consistent with repeated dosing over time, with what appears to be an acute higher dose today. Has he had access to any allergy medication at home? I pulled out my phone. I opened the footage folder. I handed it to her. I watched her watch it. Her expression was very still. When the clip of the mortar and pestle played, she set the phone down on the tray table slowly, like she was being careful with it. We need to test the other children, she said. She wasn't talking to me. She was already turning toward the door. 2 state health investigators arrived within 45 minutes. They had serious faces and clean notebooks, and they asked careful, precise questions, the kind of questions that had been designed by lawyers. I answered everything. I showed them everything. I gave them the name of the evidence folder and the physical backup location, and Dana's name, and Priya's name, and the name of the police officer who had told me to watch my step. Within 2 hours, St. Catherine's had become something else. The waiting room filled with faces I recognized, parents from the Little Stars parking lot, from the morning handoff cluster, people I'd waved at over months without learning their names. We all wore the same expression now. It wasn't panic. It was the specific leaden weight of realizing you'd been trusting something that had been hurting the person you loved most. 15 children were tested that night. 15 tested positive for diphenhydramine. My phone buzzed. Dana. The daycare doors are locked from the inside. She could see through the window. Staff were at the filing cabinets, papers being shredded. Mrs. Hargrove had been spotted in the parking lot loading filing boxes into the back of a white SUV. Then my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. Stop now, or face consequences. You have no idea who you're dealing with. I took a screenshot. I added it to the evidence folder. I forwarded it to one of the investigators who had given me a card. Then I looked through the glass at Ethan, pale and still in his hospital bed with an IV taped to the back of his hand, and I thought about those words. You have no idea who you're dealing with. The thing is, I did. I'd spent 6 weeks finding out exactly who they were dealing with, in every structural and institutional and interpersonal sense. I knew about Diane Hargrove Kessler at the licensing department. I knew about Councilman Robert Hargrove. I knew about the brother-in-law in in the DA's office. I had documented all of it. I had backed it up in 3 places. But I also think whoever sent that message had no idea who they were dealing with either. I am a pharmaceutical compliance officer. My entire professional life is the documentation of wrongdoing in regulated industries. I understand how paper trails work. I understand how regulatory capture works. I understand how institutions protect themselves and how those protections can be overcome. I am not by nature dramatic or impulsive. I am by nature methodical. I am organized. I take notes. I had taken many notes. The following week moved like something pressurized. The state health department executed an emergency inspection of Little Stars Academy and found what we'd documented and more. The mold I'd seen on the kitchen walls turned out to extend into the HVAC system, which meant the air supply for the entire building had been cycling through contaminated ductwork for an indeterminate period. The expired formula containers were collected as evidence. The mortar and pestle was collected. Staff were interviewed separately. 2 of them, facing the weight of what was in front of them, cooperated within the first 48 hours. The teenage girl from the corner, her name was Kelsey. She was 16. She was the niece of one of the other staff members and had been brought in off the books for extra supervision coverage. Told investigators she had been told the bottles would help the baby settle and had believed it. She had been told this by Mrs. Hargrove directly. She sat in that interview room and described the first day she'd seen the children go down all at once, how Mrs. Hargrove had told her it was normal, how she'd needed the money, and had told herself it must be fine. I felt something complicated about Kelsey. I still do. Diane Hargrove Kessler placed herself on administrative leave from the licensing department before investigators formally requested her records, which told investigators exactly what they needed to know. A state ethics review was opened on her position. Councilman Robert Hargrove's office issued a statement emphasizing that he had no knowledge of and no involvement in the daycare's operations, a statement nobody believed, but which bought him time. The DA's office recused itself from the prosecution due to the family connection. The case went to the state attorney general. This was, in a deeply ironic way, the best thing that could have happened. The AG's office had both the jurisdiction and the motivation to make an example. Mrs. Gwendolyn Hargrove was arrested on a Thursday, 6 weeks after Ethan's hospitalization. She was charged with 18 counts of child endangerment, 3 counts of fraud, 2 counts of criminal administration of a controlled substance, and multiple violations of state childcare regulations. Her attorney released a statement calling the charges politically motivated, which is the kind of thing attorneys say when there is nothing else to say. Priya's daughter was fine. Dana's son, who was 20 months and had been at Little Stars for only 4 months, tested negative, which the doctor attributed to lower cumulative exposure. 12 other children showed residual markers of diphenhydramine that their pediatricians would monitor for the following 2 months. All of them, as far as I know, recovered fully. The pediatric literature on repeated low-dose antihistamine exposure in infants is unsettling reading. I read all of it. I stopped sleeping well for a while. Marcus came and stayed at my apartment for the first 2 weeks after the hospitalization. Not romantically. We'd been clear with each other a long time ago about that particular door being closed, but because I needed someone in the building with me at night, and he understood that without my having to explain it fully. He sat at the kitchen table with me while I sent emails and ate the food I forgot to eat, and kept me company in the specific, low-key way that good co-parents can for each other when the circumstances require it. I'm grateful for that, genuinely. The lawsuit was filed in February, on Ethan's 14-month mark from enrollment. I joined a group of 9 other families. Our attorney, a woman named Renata Obi, who had handled institutional abuse cases for 20 years and had the unflappable energy of someone who had seen everything and been surprised by none of it, estimated the total civil exposure for Little Stars Academy and its principals at somewhere between $4 million and $8 million. The building itself had been seized pending the criminal case. The LLC that operated it was dissolved. There were a few weeks in late January where I drove past the building. I don't know why I kept doing it. It was just a building. Single-story brick, the Little Stars Academy sign still up until someone came to take it down, the parking lot empty, the windows dark. I'd driven through that parking lot more than 400 times over the course of a year. I'd waved at people across it. I'd kissed Ethan goodbye at the entrance door and told him to be good and driven away trusting something that had been monstrous. That grief is particular. It doesn't resolve the way other things resolve. I trusted people I should have investigated. I paid for cruelty and called it care. The 5 months before July, when everything appeared fine, I now cannot look at without wondering what was already happening that I hadn't noticed yet. There are days I look at Ethan and feel the specific weight of having failed him, even knowing logically that I corrected it as quickly as a person could. He's 2.5 now. He has a new daycare, a small family-run place on the east side that I vetted so thoroughly the owner joked that I was more thorough than the state inspector. He loves it. He loves his teacher, a young woman named Ms. T, who sends voice memos of him laughing. He says his own name now. He says no about 40 times a day, which is exhausting and also the best thing I've ever heard. He does not flinch at diaper changes anymore. I noticed when that stopped. I wrote it down. The criminal case against Gwendolyn Hargrove is ongoing. Her attorney has filed 3 continuances. Renata tells me this is standard and that the evidence is what the evidence is, and the evidence is comprehensive. The state licensing reform that Dana and Priya and I testified in support of passed in April requires requiring unannounced biannual inspections and independent verification of staff-to-child ratios. It's a small thing. It is not nothing. I still keep a notebook. I still write down dates and details and the things that catch my attention. Old habits from a year I'd rather not have learned anything from. What I understand now, that I didn't understand when I signed those enrollment papers, is that the $2,000 a month was never the real transaction. I was paying for a feeling, for the ability to sit at my desk and work and not wonder, for the neat story that $2,000 bought you safety. You can't actually buy safety. You can only build it. And building it requires a willingness to see things you'd rather not see, to ask questions that get you cut off mid-sentence, to sit with the discomfort of not believing the easy answer. I am not a hero for eventually doing those things. I should have done them sooner. The only thing I know for certain is that I'll never stop doing them now. Ethan laughed this morning at breakfast. He pushed his oatmeal off the tray with one deliberate finger, looked me in the eye, and laughed at the sound it made. I laughed too. Then I cleaned it up. That's the whole story. That's what's left of it, and it turns out that's enough.